My name's Sarah and my husband's name is Mike. We have a son named Alex who's 20 years old and he's currently studying at college. For years, we've been saving and scrimping in order to keep him in school. We've cut corners, skipped vacations, and done everything we could to make sure he has a chance at something better. We live in a house my grandmother left to us when she moved to a nursing home. The house is large and comfortable, but not fancy. Just feels like home to us. Mike works in the local hardware store and I work at the front desk of a doctor's office. Together, we make do with our simple lives and we're happy with that. It was Thursday afternoon and the sun was shining brightly, making me think about calling it an early day. Then, Mike's phone started ringing, breaking my thoughts of an early weekend. While I was chopping carrots for dinner, I heard Mike answering the phone. "Hello, Mom, slow down. What's wrong?" he asked. His face turned pale as he listened to the caller. I stopped what I was doing with a towel in my hand, watching him walk around. He ended the call looking shaken. "That was my dad," he said, sitting down on the couch as if his strings had been cut. "They've lost their business. They're bankrupt. They lost everything, even their house." My heart sank. "Oh, Mike, that's terrible. What do they plan to do?" He paused, thinking about our tight budget and how our quiet life was about to change. "What did you say to them?" I rubbed my neck, a sign that I was stressed. "I told them I would talk to you first, because it's your home, Sarah. I wouldn't just surprise you with this without checking. Mike's parents, Robert and Linda, aren't easygoing people. They're high-flying, used to a good life. Our simple lifestyle is miles away from what they're used to. You know how they are, Mike. Their house doesn't fit their style." I know, he said, looking uneasy. "But they're my family, Sarah. They need help." Thinking about all the times we had visited them, their noses turned up at our humble home. It was clear that they would feel out of place here. But then, imagining them desperate enough to ask for assistance, my resolve softened. "All right," I said. "They can come, but only temporarily, right? Until they get back on their feet again." Mike picked up his phone and dialed. After a brief exchange, he said to his mother, "Mom, Sarah and I have talked it over. You can stay here for a while, but just until you find another place." "Got it. We're not a hotel." I couldn't hear the conversation on the other end, but Mike's reply of yes gave me an idea of what was being said. He hung up the phone and let out a long, deep breath. Sarah and her parents were grateful. They would be there the next week. Last week, Mike told his folks that they could stay with us for a while, and today they moved in. I watched from the porch as 2 huge trucks drove up our driveway and I swear my heart sank. Mike was there directing traffic like a parking lot attendant, trying to keep a smile on his face. Robert was the first one to get out of the car with a big grin on his face, slapping Mike on the back so hard that you'd think he won the lottery instead of just moving into his son's house. "Sarah, darling," Linda said, coming up to me all perfumed and cheerful, planting a kiss on my cheek that felt like a branding iron. "You are an angel for allowing us to invade your home like this." I forced a smile, and my eyes darted to the pile of stuff they were unpacking. "It's okay, Linda. Is this all?" She waved her hand dismissively as if the furniture and boxes weren't already taking over our front yard. "Oh, these are just the essentials. The rest we'll store somewhere else." "Essentials?" I bit my tongue to keep from saying anything rash. If these were essentials, I dreaded to think what they'd left behind. Mike caught my eye, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing. "Let's get this stuff inside then," Mike said, more to himself than anyone else. Robert and Linda directed the movers with the kind of authority you'd think they were moving into a palace, not our modest little home. The movers shuffled past, hauling in armchairs, countless boxes, and, would you believe it? A grandfather clock. Who needs a grandfather clock in their temporary home? "Right there, boys. Just set it all there," Robert directed, pointing at various spots around our living room, which was rapidly disappearing under a sea of their belongings. I pulled Mike aside while the movers took a breather. "Mike, this is crazy. They brought enough to furnish a whole house. Where are we going to put all this?" Mike rubbed his temples. I know. I'll talk to them, okay? Let's just get through today. We retreated as the movers continued their work. The whole ground floor was turning into a replica of Robert and Linda's old house. Every corner filled, every space taken over. By the time the movers were done, our once cozy living room looked more like a storage unit. Dinner that night was a chaotic affair. We barely found the table under all the clutter. Robert and Linda seemed oblivious to the mess, chatting away about their journey here. "Sarah, you really should try this wine," Robert said, popping open a bottle of something French, and probably more expensive than our entire grocery budget for the week. "We're so grateful to you both," Linda chimed in, her voice sugary enough to give you cavities. "It's just till we find our feet." "Yeah, about that," Mike started, clearing his throat. "We need to talk about some ground rules. Space is tight and, oh, don't worry about it, son," Robert waved him off. "We'll manage just fine, won't we, dear?" He smiled at Linda, who nodded enthusiastically. I looked around our invaded space. The piles of boxes, the fancy ornaments crowding out our simple decorations. Managed just fine. I wasn't sure about that. Living with Robert and Linda was an adjustment, to say the least. A few days passed since they moved in, and just when I thought we were settling into some kind of routine, the kitchen became a new battleground. It was Tuesday evening, and I was cooking dinner. Something simple and hearty. Spaghetti with homemade tomato sauce. As I stirred the pot, Linda walked into the kitchen with her nose wrinkled, as if she had just walked into a barn. "What's that smell?" she asked with a tone dripping with disdain. "It's dinner," I said, keeping my voice steady as best I could. "Spaghetti night, spaghetti," she scoffed, peering over my shoulder. "Where's the meat, the fresh herbs?" "This is what you feed us." Mike, hearing the commotion, wandered in, drying his hands on a dish towel. "What's the problem?" His mom turned to him with a look that could curdle milk. "The problem is that we're expected to eat this." She gestured at the bubbling pot as if it were a cauldron of poison. I took a deep breath, trying not to let her get to me. "It's what we usually eat. We can't afford steaks and fancy meals every night." Mike stepped between us, his face set in hard lines. "This is Sarah's house and this is what we eat." "Oh, we will," Linda retorted, her eyes narrowing. "And we expect you to provide the groceries we need." "We're not used to living like this." I had had enough. "Look, I'm sorry, you're used to different things, but this is all we can afford. Our budget doesn't allow for luxuries." Robert, who had been silent until then, chimed in with his booming voice. "Then maybe you need to reconsider your budget, young lady. We aren't animals to feed off scraps." Mike's jaw clenched. We're doing the best we can." The room was tense. Everyone's shoulders were up around their ears. Finally, Linda sighed. "Fine. Tomorrow we'll provide you with a list of our meals. You can check it the next day as promised." Linda gave me a list: marbled beef, fresh seafood, organic food, imported goods. I looked at the list with my heart sinking. That night, we sat with Robert and Linda around the kitchen table with the list between us. "We expect proper food. Steaks from marbled beef or the finest fish," declared Robert, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Mike and I exchanged shocked. "We can't swing that," he said, his voice firm but weary. "That's just not in our budget." Their response was swift and harsh. Linda snapped, "Lazy, you two. Can't even provide a decent meal." In the end, feeling cornered, I caved to their demand. I started buying only the highest quality products, while Mike and I got by on fast food to save costs. A month later, when I sat down to crunch the numbers, my heart nearly stopped. Our food expenses had doubled, and Linda's luxury baths had sent our water bill skyrocketing. It had become a battleground, but tonight was different. Robert and Linda dug into some lavish dishes, insisting on buying marbled steaks and imported fish, while Mike and me sat across from them with our simple pasta. The difference wasn't only on our plates. It was drawing deeper lines between us every day. As they savored another bite of their expensive meal, I couldn't hold back anymore. "This has to stop," I said, my words heavy in the air. Linda looked up, her fork halfway to her mouth. "What are you talking about? We can't keep living like this. Eating separately, different meals is ridiculous. From now on, everyone in the house will eat the same and we'll stick to what we can afford." Robert laughed, a harsh sound grating on my nerves. "You expect us to eat that slop?" "It's not slop, it's dinner, what we eat," I shot back. My patience was fraying. The laughter vanished from Robert's face, replaced by a scowl. Linda chimed in, her tone sharp and accusing. "How can you be so greedy and lazy? Cooking decent food isn't that hard." They both turned to Mike, their expressions full of "Are you going to let her talk to us like that in your own house?" That was the last straw. Mike slammed his hand down on the table, making the plates jump. "First off, this was Sarah's house and you will treat her with respect." The impact of his words hit hard. Linda's eyes filled with tears and her voice quivered. "I never expected you to raise your voice at me, your own mother." Robert's anger boiled over as he stood up, pointing an accusing finger at Mike. "Look at you, henpecked and dancing to her tune. Is that what you've become?" I stood my ground though my heart was pounding. "Enough. This conversation is over. From now on, no more expensive steaks or fish. We all eat the same." Their looks could have frozen the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then, without a word, Robert and Linda pushed back from the table and left. Mike and I sat back down, the silence hanging heavy between us. He reached for my hand, squeezing it tight. "I'm sorry it had to come to this," he said. "I am too," I replied, feeling the weight of the evening settle around us. "But it's the right thing. We can't live like this." After the big blow-up at dinner, things cooled down, but only on the surface. Robert and Linda were quieter, sure, but there was a tension to their silence that put me on edge. I had a feeling they wouldn't take the new house rules lying down, and I was right. It started subtly. A few days later, I was cleaning up after lunch with sandwiches when the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands with a towel and went to the front door, thinking maybe a package or a neighbor would be there. But when I opened the door, there was a delivery man holding a large, fragrant bag from a high-end restaurant in town. "Delivery for Sarah," he said, looking at his clipboard. I was confused. There must have been some. I didn't order it. Just then, Linda came up behind me, smiling a bit too widely. "Oh, I took the liberty to order for us. I think we deserve a nice meal after all that recent discomfort." I frowned, hesitantly taking the bag. "Linda, we are cutting back on expenses." She shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "I thought it was on your account, dear." "My bad." Mike walked into the room from the kitchen and heard us. "What's happening? Your mother decided that we deserve an expensive lunch," I said, the weight of the bag in my hands suddenly feeling heavier. Mike's expression hardened. "Mom, no more of this." Robert stepped into the hallway, his voice booming. "What's a little lunch going to hurt? You can't expect us to live like monks forever." I set the bag down on the entranceway table, feeling frustration bubble up. "It's not just lunch. It's every meal and every extra expense that we can't afford. We've told you we're sticking to the budget." Linda's face turned cold. "Well, if you're going to make a fuss about a simple meal, then I suppose we won't bother next time." Mike pinched the bridge of his nose. "It's not about the food. It's about following the rules of this house. You can't go behind our back." The conversation went in circles for a few more minutes until Robert and Linda retreated to their room, leaving the uneaten expensive lunch on the table. Mike and I looked at each other. The unspoken agreement hung between us that this couldn't go on. "I'll call the restaurant to explain the situation and see if they can take the food back," I said, though I knew it was a long shot. Mike nodded, but his face was drawn with worry. "We need to talk to them again. This can't happen again." I picked up the phone and called the restaurant. I explained the situation as well as I could. The manager was understanding but firm. Once food leaves the premises, he said, they can't take it back. I thanked him and hung up, feeling the weight of the situation on my shoulders. That evening, we gathered in the living room for yet another family meeting. Robert and Linda sat on one side, their expressions a mix of defiance and resignation. Mike and I took the other side, determined to stand our ground. Look, Mike started, his voice steady but firm. We can't keep having these arguments. We need to find a way to live together without constantly clashing. Robert folded his arms, his jaw set. And what do you propose? Living on scraps and handouts? I interjected, trying to keep my voice calm. It's not about living on scrap. It's about living within our means. We have a budget, and we need to stick to it. Linda sighed dramatically. We didn't come here to be treated like children. We just want to live comfortably. Mike leaned forward, his eyes locking onto his parents, and we want that too. But it has to be within reason. We're not asking for much, just respect for our rules and our budget. There was a long silence, the kind that seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, Robert spoke. His voice was softer than before. All right, we'll try your way, but understand, this isn't easy for us either. Linda nodded reluctantly. Fine, we'll make do with what you provide. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The next few days were tense but manageable. We ate the same meals. There were no surprise deliveries. We seemed to find a rhythm, although it was shaky. One evening, I found Linda in the kitchen. Her face was pale and drawn. In her hands, she held a letter. Her hands trembled. What's wrong? I asked. My concern was genuine. She looked up at me. Her eyes were filled with tears. It's from the bank. Our house is being foreclosed. My heart sank. I'm sorry, Linda. She nodded, wiping her eyes. We didn't want to burden you with this. We thought we could handle it on our own. Mike walked in, sensing the gravity of the situation. What's going on? I handed him the letter and his face fell as he read it. Mom, Dad, why didn't you tell us? Robert entered the kitchen with his shoulders slumping. We didn't want it to worry you. We thought we could sort it out. Mike wrapped his arm around his mother with a gentle voice. We're a family. We should face this together. That night, as a family, we sat down and made a plan to help Robert and Linda get back on their feet. But it would require sacrifice from all of us. So we tightened our budget further and Mike took extra hours at work. And I started freelancing to bring in extra income. It wasn't easy, but it brought us closer together. The tension slowly eased as we worked towards a common goal. Robert and Linda began to appreciate the simpler meals, and we found joy in the little things, like family game nights and walks in the park. Months later, as we sat down for dinner, the atmosphere was different. There was laughter and conversation, a sense of unity that hadn't been there before. We had weathered the storm together, and in doing so, we became a stronger family. As I looked around the table, I realized that sometimes it takes a crisis to bring people together. And while the road was rocky, we found our way through it together. The months turned into years and our family found a new equilibrium. Robert and Linda eventually regained financial footing, thanks to everyone's efforts in the household, even contributing to household expenses and easing the burden on me and Mike. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Linda, Mike, and Sarah, we've been thinking about something. You've done so much for us and we want to give back. Mike and I exchanged confused looks. What do you mean, Mom? Mike asked. Robert cleared his throat, his eyes shining with pride and gratitude. We've decided to start a small business. It's something we always wanted to do, and we think it will help us all. Linda nodded eagerly. We found a cafe downtown that's for sale. It could be our family business. We can all work together to make it special. The idea sounded interesting, and as we talked about it more, excitement grew. The cafe has potential, and with everyone's skills and hard work, we believe we can make it a successful business. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. We pooled our resources, secured a loan, and began renovating the cafe. It was hard work, but it was also incredibly rewarding. Mike's business acumen, my culinary skills, Robert's handyman expertise, and Linda's knack for hospitality. On opening day, the atmosphere was electric and the sense of accomplishment palpable as we served our first customers. As I stood behind the counter serving them, I felt a deep sense of pride in what we had accomplished as a group. This cafe was a testament to our resilience and unity, and we were proud to have come so far together as a family. Over time, the cafe has become a beloved community hub. People come not just for delicious food and coffee, but for the warmth and camaraderie that fills the space. We host events, support local artists, and have even started a Pay It Forward program to help those in need. One evening, as we close the cafe, I look around at my family, Mike, Robert, Linda, and our 2 young children who are helping to wipe down the tables. The journey had been long and challenging, but it brought us closer than ever. Mike wrapped his arm around me, his eyes reflecting the same sense of fulfillment I felt. "We did it, Sarah. We really did." I smiled, leaning into him. "Yes, we did. And I wouldn't trade this for anything." As we walked home together, the lights of the cafe glowing softly behind us, I realized that the true measure of success isn't in money or accolades. It's in the love and support we share, the way we come together in times of crisis, and the strength we find in each other. In the end, it's not just a cafe we built. It's a home, a haven, and a testimony to the power of family. As long as we have each other, I know we can face anything that comes our way.